It is my privilege to welcome you to the showing of a remarkable film, The Incredible Bread Machine. Why me? Because I am a professor of economics? Yes. But even more importantly, because I am excited about what this film has to say about bread, about people, and about freedom. Following the film, I will be talking about their reactions to the film with two of the most important economists of the present day, each a leading spokesman for the point of view that he defends. The two men are Dr. Walter Heller of the University of Minnesota, chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under Presidents Kennedy and Johnson, and Dr. Milton Friedman of the University of Chicago, acknowledged leader of what has come to be known as the Chicago School in Economics. We will be joined in these discussions by three of the young people who were principally involved in creating the script for this film and in the writing of the book, The Incredible Bread Machine. These three young people come from what some have called the think tank of the West Coast, officially known as World Research Incorporated of San Diego. This film you are about to see has been honored at an American film festival, but it deserves to be honored as well at any gathering of those who believe in free men, free economies, and free societies. I must report to you with mixed feelings that it also deprives the economist of one of his most cherished excuses for the low level of economic literacy in the general public. We have long insisted that the complex materials of our important calling simply cannot be communicated to any but a select few. The Incredible Bread Machine destroys that myth once and for all. But first, and most importantly, it is my privilege to present to you someone to say an introductory word about the film. Someone drawn not at random, but most happily, the Honorable William E. Simon, Secretary of the Treasury of the United States. Mr. Secretary.
Thank you very much. The Incredible Bread Machine may sound to many people like something out of Mary Poppins. But please, don't be misled by its whimsical title, because I think it represents probably the finest effort at explaining in lay terms the economic facts of life to the American people. I first read the book some months ago and was pleased to be among the first to have seen this film. I understand the book is required reading in some colleges. I happen to believe that this book ought to be required reading in all colleges and high schools as well as the film be required seeing. I was pleased today to meet three of the six young authors, Susan Love Brown, Treasury Post, and Karl Keating from World Research, Inc., who have brought this subject to life to present to the American people. I only wish that we in the Treasury Department could explain with the impact that this film has done. You know, for years, we in industry, government, universities have complained about the economic illiteracy that exists and the need for basic economic education. We have been concerned, and rightly so, about the half-truths and the myths that have sprung up about our free enterprise system. That is what this book and this movie is about. The economic myths and the dynamism of our free enterprise system and individual initiative. How profits translate into food on our table, into more jobs and better jobs, into goods and services that we all enjoy. How we need to get big government off our back to allow the people to produce, understanding that government doesn't produce our wealth and our prosperity. People do. And most importantly, the inextricable relationship between our economic freedoms and our personal freedoms. How if we lose one, the other will not be far behind. That is the central theme of our times. As one of the participants in this movie said, that is what it's all about. Dr. Rogge.
Mr. Valentine, Byler?
Byler, due to your refusal to pay Social Security taxes, the Internal Revenue Service is confiscating your horses for sale at public auctions. The money will be used to fulfill your tax debt.
All legal, and
You'll be refunded any monies over the amount due to you.
You know that it is by my faith that I cannot resist.
We appreciate that, Mr. Byler.
yes, we certainly do. We appreciate that.
Stephen Anthony. Stephen Anthony. Stephen Anthony, by the authority of the County of Los Angeles, under the laws of eminent domain, you are ordered to leave your property.
Come on, Anthony, give it up. Stop making a fool of yourself. You don't have a chance and you know it. Don't keep us out here all night. Come on out of there. You're wasting
Stephen Anthony has held Los Angeles County sheriffs at bay for almost 10 weeks now. You may remember that Anthony's home and several others around it were condemned to make way for the construction of the Hollywood Motion Picture and Television Museum. Anthony's neighbors moved out, but Anthony is holding out.
It's my house, and you're not going to take it away from me!
God. God. Wait. Out of the... Don't hurt us. Get that light. Get it. I'll get the kitchen. Over here. Help me, God. No.
It was terrible. They tore the furniture apart. They tore everything in our house apart. They shouted at us, and well, they handcuffed me and put me on the bed. And they were violent burglars, and I thought we were going to be killed.
The hell of it was.
It was terrifying.
We didn't know it at the time, of course. They were Justice Department agents or federal agents. They were looking for drugs. Hey, I think we made a mistake.
The scenes you have just witnessed are based on fact. The Amish farmer received $37.39 back from the Internal Revenue Service after it auctioned off his horses to pay his Social Security taxes. The man defending his home was finally arrested, and his house was torn down. The property is now a parking lot. The private museum was never built for lack of funds. The narcotics officers had burst into the wrong house without properly identifying themselves. The victims sued, but the agents were acquitted of all charges, and no compensation for damages was awarded.
Okay, it's a wrap. Good idea. Well, don't kill those lights yet. I want to play around a little bit with
It's
this.
getting arty again. Nobody say anything, you guys.
Tell Lee to keep the sound rolling.
Are you still rolling, babe?
Actually rolling.
Okay,
No, it's a real thing, but it's
Oh,
I'm gonna clean it up here. I don't
didn't
care. I
like
can't
it.
find the gun. You gonna clean it up with me? Okay, I found it.
However much you may say is right, you gotta admit that what happened shows the government had good intentions.
Oh, at least it starts out that way. But when you try and force good intentions on people, it's very easy to set up a humanitarian guillotine.
And I can tell you, Carl, they usually do.
That's not necessarily so.
Yes, it is.
There they go. You guys never agree on anything, do you?
What do you mean we don't?
You never agree on anything. You're the strangest combination of people I've ever been.
Okay, up against the walls, the bust.
It's not with us.
Look, Paul, the reason you're so confused is that you can't pigeonhole us. We're all different, and we have different ideas on a lot of things.
ideas. Everybody's got a different one on what should be done. When faced with a problem, most people think there ought to be a law. But who decides? The trouble is that laws often do more harm than good. Well, we have our viewpoint too, and we wanted to get it across straight. So that's why we're in the movie. We figured we could play ourselves better than anyone else, and we wanted our points to be made clear. We're saying that individuals can solve problems better than government, and can keep their personal and economic freedoms at the same time. Personal and economic freedoms, they go together, and that's what this movie's all about.
Hanging in the sky, screaming down the highway, jumping into life. I'm gonna live it my way. Green light straight ahead, really feeling fine. Don't try and tie me down, I belong to me.
People love to take chances. You take all the risk out of life and you take all the life out of life. I mean, the only safe way to get through life is to stay in bed so you can't trip on your own shoelaces. Do this, don't do that. Hey, whose life is it anyway? Well, you might say, isn't the freedom of choice you lose worth the protection you get? But who gets to draw the line? I want to draw my own line.
I belong to me.
I calculate my own risk, and this is my regulator.
I wouldn't give anyone my right to choose.
I'm an adult. I smoke, I drink, so what? I enjoy it.
Feel free to choose. Life is a chance.
I wanted to have my baby at home, but I didn't want a doctor, so I hired a midwife. But she was arrested for practicing medicine without a license.
Standing in the sun and shooting for the stars, hanging on a mountain, cruising in a car.
Prescription for vitamins. What's next? It's my body, isn't it?
So much to live, yeah, so much to choose. I'll stand in my own shoes, win or lose.
I love it. For years the cops been after my ass. Because see, gambling is bad. See, it's okay to bet at the track, but it ain't okay to phone your bets in. Unless, of course, you got a legal stake-run OTB or a legal lottery. Now, floating crap games are no-no. Unless, of course, it floats into Vegas where it's okay.
Feel free to choose. Life is a chance. Free to choose. Let me fly, let me breathe, let me try. So much to live, yeah, so much to choose. I stand in my own shoes. My own shoes. My own shoes.
Hey, you ever had any trouble with the police about permits or anything like that?
No, they all want to be in the movies.
Hey, Scott, what if I were to say to you that all cameramen had to be licensed by the state or federal government?
Why? I mean, why would they want to do that?
Well, porno flicks. To keep people from making porno
Now,
flicks.
that's a good idea, Stuart. I approve.
Oh, you ever worked on a porno flick?
Oh, wait a minute. I've got to get this reaction for posterity. Wait a minute.
Porno flick. Wait a minute.
Against the law now, man.
All right.
Tell the truth.
Okay. Once. It was boring, dumb, and the pay was lousy.
Oh, come on, Scott. You don't have to lie. We're all your friends.
Hey, this is you. Isn't this you, Susan?
Yeah, and that's Krista, my little girl.
As long as I do not initiate force or fraud against others, I wish to live my own life in accordance with my own convictions. That's nice. But, listen, aren't there things that benefit society as a whole that should limit your freedom?
Well, I shouldn't be allowed to initiate force or fraud. For example, I shouldn't be able to force you to give up something that's yours. I shouldn't be allowed to force you to finance something you don't believe in or have no interest in.
Right. Yes,
I see.
But if I don't have that right, then why is it legally and morally right for the government to have it?
The government should be protecting my rights, not violating them.
Once upon a time, there was a land of plenty, Ceylon. Food was abundant, but not all were fed. For the blessings of heaven showered not equally on all the subjects of this country. For there are always a few who are hungrier than others. But this was accepted as one of the vicissitudes of life, until one day a great lady, Mrs. Bandaranaike, brought forth a plan wherein all would be fed equally, and contentment would rule the land of Sri Lanka, because the less fortunate of the people had not the means to pay for the food. It was given to them for free. Now clearly, her intentions were benevolent. But as is the way of best-laid plans of the mongoose and the cobra, true equality seemed elusive. For among those people who loved equality so dearly, those who worked to grow their food felt unequal. They too felt they should have their food for free. But lo and behold, the more who ate for free, the fewer who tilled the fields. The land of enchantment turned into the land of discontentment. For now, there was no food, although it was for free. Promises, promises, but now our people starve, the people's voices did plead. Patience, patience, we'll get the food, but first must come the money. Now the discontentment grew among not only those who cried for food, but from those forced to pay the bills. For the freer the food, the higher the taxes. Alas, the lines grew longer, the food grew shorter. For one cannot give away what one does not have, or no one gets it if there ain't any. The voice of the people grew louder still. The press did clamor for more food. Hush the stinging barbs, the lady charged. Now is not the time for dissent. We must pull together. The army faithful did not question. The deed was done. Silence reigned at the point of a gun. Now all is silent and peaceful again in the land of Sri Lanka. For problems which we cannot talk about are no problems at all.
Let me put it to you this way.
All right.
It's the classic question.
Yeah.
How long can personal freedoms, freedom of speech, the press, be preserved in a society that denies you your economic freedom?
But it doesn't. It doesn't at all.
Oh,
That's
look, you
nothing.
remember the Sri Lanka. Remember that?
I used to think that minimum wage job was a good idea. Then I got this job to help me through night school. Man, when the government raised the minimum wage, I thought I had it made. But then my boss told me that he couldn't keep me at that rate. So now the job's gone. Starting next week, folks around here are gonna have to put down a deposit and carry their own umbrellas around. Minimum wage.
Lights, please. Run the film, please. We've been talking about the housing problem in urban America, which has become an explosive problem. Today we're seeing a film on urban renewal. There's the government tearing down some housing units. Pretty soon we'll be replacing them, presumably, with new housing units. Empowered by the people's demand for urban renewal legislation, the government from 1940 to 1971 has torn down over 500,000 housing units and has built some 200,000, which you will see in a moment, I presume. It seems that the government has torn down 2.5 times as many units as it built at a cost of $7 to $10 billion. Ah, there's a new unit. Elegant project, in a way. Looks pretty sturdy. There's more being torn down. Well, I suppose we'll see some more new units pretty soon, I hope. Of the new units being erected, almost half are lower income units. Of course, that means that more than half are upper income units.
I think this must be a new government plan to keep people upwardly mobile.
No, seriously, what about the people that were displaced, the poor people who lost their homes and then when the government tore this down and then they couldn't afford the new housing?
Well, I'm sure the government must have taken care of that problem. They're building these new apartment units, I suppose. Oh, some more being torn down. Ah, there's a new project. Pretty expansive, fairly neat looking in a way. I'll be seeing some new... Oh, what's that? Well, there she goes. Oh, I know what that was. That was the St. Louis project. The government, as I understand it, built that project to replace a slum, but unfortunately it too turned into a slum pretty soon, so they had to tear it down again. Well, I guess it's back to the old drawing board in Washington.
Carl and I had the same discussion last night. I don't know if it's because I'm married or if it's because I'm a woman. But I am being discriminated against. Shh. Because if a married woman can have Social Security without working as her husband's dependent, then why should I have to pay Social Security taxes? You guys. They take it out of my payroll, but where does it go? It isn't fair, just because I'm married and working.
Well, I knew there had to be some advantage to not being married.
Well, I don't see much point in worrying about it. The system is already billions of dollars in debt. And even as a single guy, I may not get anything out of it. It's a real fraud.
But aren't they doing something about it? I mean, the Equal Rights Amendment and all that.
So what? All that means is it will be equally bankrupt for everyone.
But if it wasn't for Social Security, my grandmother would be starving.
Hey, by the way, how is your grandmother doing these days?
Starving.
Come on, what's your question?
Doesn't it bother any of you that people are starving everywhere?
Sure it does. A lot of things do. Housing shortages, not enough food, unemployment, all kinds of stuff.
The point is learning how best to solve these problems.
And you don't solve problems by violating people's rights.
Okay, you feel that way, but not everybody does.
Not everybody's that smart.
Well, look, like I was saying, Lou, if you want to solve housing and food shortages, you got to make more housing and food, right? It means you got to produce them. Which means production is the thing that counts.
And government doesn't produce anything. People do.
Yeah, right. Millions of electronic toothbrushes, automatic door openers, tons of non-biodegradable junk. And then they spend millions of dollars getting people to buy the worthless stuff.
They can't force anyone to buy their junk.
Right, nobody gets it if there ain't none.
Oh, would you repeat that for me, please?
Oh, definitely. No one gets it if there ain't none.
But if they stop producing that kind of stuff and just stick to the essential things, then everyone would have enough food and decent housing. But how can you force them to do that?
You don't. That's just the point. Force. When you have government intervention in the market, then you don't have freedom. And when you don't have freedom, then productivity, progress, creativity, everything suffers. It's a historical fact.
Government isn't perfect. Look, I admit government isn't... Hey, Paul? It isn't perfect. Paul, will you break down another camera?
I mean, really, government isn't perfect. And I really believe in free enterprise and the free enterprise system. But if you don't have government regulations and big business, you know, the multinationals that just take over. Today, the country, tomorrow, the world. That's how they feel. If you don't have government, you've got to have government to protect from the force of big business.
Force? What force? How can business operating legitimately in a free market force anybody to do anything?
Well, the big ones have a lot of dollar power.
Right. With that kind of power, they just corner the market. They buy up all the competition, form cartels, monopolies, screw the people, that's what.
This man has a monopoly in bathtub gin. He's well organized. He provides the consumers with a product they desire. He has a manufacturing plant, the means of distribution, salesmen, and outlets. He sets his price and he gets it. He doesn't have to worry about competition. He controls the market. This is a government monopoly, the U.S. Postal Service. It provides the country with a needed service. The prices aren't enough to cover its costs, but the difference is made up in taxes. The government has simply outlawed all competitors, and the U.S. Postal Service controls the market. These companies are government-sanctioned franchise monopolies. They furnish the utilities in their areas, but their rates, policies, and territory are determined by government commissions. If you don't like it, you can lump it. Because of special government franchises, they control their markets. And there are yet other forms of market control. For when government has been given the power to grant legislative favors, private interests will not hesitate to bend that power to their own direction. Once there lived a king. His kingdom was California, and his throne was Sacramento. His subjects were the gentlemen of the state legislature. From 1922 to 1950, Arthur H. Samish, a private lobbyist, ruled California. Since the idea of government intervention in business is widely accepted, it was just a question of getting the proper legislation passed or keeping unfavorable legislation from being passed. Although in his legislative activities, Samish never broke a law, his powerful influence as a lobbyist resulted ultimately in the use of force through legislation and hurt the consumer and, of course, business outside the Samish circle. Arthur Samish one day received a telephone call from Louis Rosenstiel, owner of famous 4-year-old Shenley whiskey in New York.
Artie, I got something important on my mind I want to discuss with you. Come see me.
Well, when the big man calls, the little man jumps. I met him at his office, and he said to me,
Harry, I'm very much concerned about Harry Hatch.
You mean the president of Hiram Walker?
Yes, he's a mean man. I'd like to see something done about him.
What do you suggest?
Well, he has a whiskey called 10 High, and it's the biggest seller in California.
Tell me something about it.
It's a 3-year-old whiskey.
3 years old, huh? That's all I need to know. You leave it to me. I'll take care of Mr. Harry Hatch. When the legislature came back into session, I had one of my friends in the assembly introduce a bill which provided that all whiskey sold in the state of California had to be at least 4 years old. The bill zipped through the legislature without a whisper of opposition. Governor Olson vetoed it, but his veto was overridden. The Drys loved the bill. For once I had them on my side. They'd vote for anything that curtailed the liquor industry. The others thought it was a good bill because it protected the quality of whiskey. After all, I was looking out for the public's interest. It just happened that the public's interest coincided with that of Louis Rosenstiel.
But getting favors from government is not the sin. The sin is when the government has these favors to give out.
Right. If the government didn't have the favors to sell, the consumer would be king, not Samish.
Are you running?
Yeah, I'm still rolling. Take this, will you?
Right.
Oh, give me that brown.
Okay, Scott, what's your problem now? Well, I understand the illegal monopolies, gangsters, right?
Huh?
Okay, and the phone company and Amtrak, those are monopolies.
Don't forget, they're legal monopolies.
Okay, legal monopolies. And the power companies, due to government franchises, legal monopolies again.
Sure.
Okay, so we have monopolies due to private enterprises getting the government to pass legislation, laws, licensing, things like that, right? Mm-hmm. Which inhibits free enterprise.
Right.
But do you have the guts to show how real big business monopolies can screw the people?
Hey, let me ask you a question. Can you give us an example, any example, of a really true current free market monopoly?
Well, sure, every state
Now remember,
union...
a free market monopoly can't get any favors from the government.
Listen,
no restrictions outlining the competition or giving it an unfair advantage.
There are
no tax breaks, no subsidies, no franchises, no legislation in its favor, no tariffs, no licensing.
There's not a place in the country
no price fixing. A true free market monopoly. We couldn't find one either.
Shot down! You want your camera back?
Give me the camera.
This is a legend of success and plunder, and a man, Tom Smith, who squelched world hunger. Now Smith, an inventor, had specialized in toys. So people were surprised when they found that he, instead of making toys, was baking bread. The way to make bread he'd conceived cost less than people could believe. And not just make it. This device could, in addition, wrap and slice. The price per loaf, one loaf or many, the minuscule sum of under a penny. Can you imagine what this meant? Can you comprehend the consequent? The first time yet, the world well fed, and all because of Tom Smith's bread. A citation from the president for Smith's amazing bread. This and other honors, too, were heaped upon his head. But isn't it a wondrous thing how quickly fame is flown? Smith, the hero of today, tomorrow, scarcely known. Yes, the fickle years passed by. Smith was a millionaire, but Smith himself was now forgot, though bread was everywhere. People, asked from where it came, would very seldom know. They would simply eat and ask, was not it always so? However, Smith cared not a bit, for millions ate his bread, and everything is fine, thought he. I am rich, and they are fed. Everything was fine, he thought. He reckoned not with fate. Note the sequence of events starting on the date on which the business tax went up. Then, to a slight extent, the price on every loaf rose too, up to 1 full cent. What's going on, the public cried. He's guilty of pure plunder. He has no right to get so rich on other people's hunger. A prize cartoon depicted Smith with fat and drooping jowls, snatching bread from hungry babes, indifferent to their howls. Well, since the public does come first, it could not be denied that in matters such as this, the public must decide. So, antitrust now took a hand. Of course, it was appalled at what it found was going on. The Bread Trust, it was called. Now, this was getting serious, so Smith felt that he must have a friendly interview with the men in antitrust. So, hat in hand, he went to them. They'd surely been misled. No rule of law had he defied. But then, their lawyer said,
the rule of law in complex times has proved itself deficient. We much prefer the rule of men. It's vastly more efficient. Now, let me state the present rules.
The lawyer then went on.
These very simple guidelines you can rely upon. You're gouging on your prices if you charge more than the rest. But it's unfair competition if you think you can charge less. A second point that we would make to help avoid confusion. Don't try to charge the same amount. That would be collusion. You must compete, but not too much. For if you do, you see, then the market would be yours. And that's monopoly.
Price too high or price too low? Now, which charge did they make? Well, they weren't loath to charging both, with public good at stake. In fact, they went one better. They charged monopoly. No muss, no fuss, oh, woe is us. Egad, they charged all three.
5 years in jail,
the judge then said.
You're lucky it's not worse. Robber barons must be taught. Society comes first.
Now bread is baked by government. And as might be expected, everything is well controlled. The public well protected. True, loaves cost $1 each, but our leaders do their best. The selling price is half a cent. Taxes pay the rest.
my good fortune immediately following World War II to sit in one of the graduate school classrooms under the tutelage of Walter Heller at the University of Minnesota. And I've been a student, not in the classroom with Milton Friedman, but a student of his for many years now. With both of these men, I have some disagreements, but both seem to be able to withstand the knowledge of that fact without any great emotional disturbance. I found Walter Heller to be an effective and concerned and humane teacher, and I have not been surprised by his great success, by the fact that he has established himself as one of the most effective and articulate spokesmen for the modern liberal point of view in economic and social policy, climaxed, of course, by his role as architect of the economic programs for the Kennedy and Johnson administrations. Walter, tell us the good news first. Was there anything in this film, were there any of the points made in this film that elicited your enthusiastic or even lukewarm acceptance?
It's well done, but it does bother me that we put together, or that you all put together, such a chamber of horrors about government interference. You know, it would be equally easy to put together a chamber of horrors about freedom or business run rampant. One could show kickbacks and bribes. One could show children maimed and burned by flammable materials or by thalidomide. One could show the people who were so badly treated in the equity funding or the equity funding fraud or the W.T. Grant disaster. But that would be an absolutely unfair and unrepresentative picture of either the American business community or of a society without adequate government protection of freedoms.
Walter, we're in New York City. Let's talk housing for a moment. You saw...
Don't expect me to defend rent controls in New York City.
Good. What about urban renewal?
Well, urban renewal has been handled badly. I don't know that the concept is bad, but it's true that a lot of urban renewal has demolished old buildings and not put in new ones. That does not mean that some kind of government help for those who are unable to afford decent housing is ruled out.
Why stop at housing? Why not provide them with food, clothing, whatever it is they wish?
Well, where you have...
Are you saying that whenever you find people in need, that the state must then intervene?
What I'm saying is that we have a concept of humanity and compassion, and where that because of old age, because of incapacitation, because of unemployment that's generated in the process, let's say, of fighting inflation, when people are unable to take care of themselves, we try, both by such things as social insurance, and by government transfer programs to protect them from starvation, from privation, from suffering. And I don't see that a humanitarian government should make any apologies for that at all.
Walter, let me ask you a very specific question. Do you believe it a moral act to use force to take money from one person and give to another?
Well, you know, you like to put it in terms of force. Taxes are compulsory, that's right. But society has made that judgment. If that is a societal judgment, that there are unfortunate people to whom money should be transferred and that we need to use the tax system to reduce these extreme inequalities of opportunity and income and wealth, I don't find that morally wrong, no.
As you know, there are proposals before our society for the government to become involved in a more comprehensive planning of these processes you're talking about. Where do you stand on that?
I'm against a planned economy. I don't mind more planning in the sense of looking ahead and saying, you know, over here it looks to me as if there are going to be shortages of steel and aluminum and copper and so forth, and we ought to provide the information to the private economy that alerts them to that, and perhaps we ought to provide some incentives, but there are areas where our information or the nature of the profit motivation, which doesn't take into account certain costs like pollution that are inflicted on third parties, where the government has to get in the act. Otherwise, we aren't going to protect ourselves from some of the economic evils to which this complex society is subject. But the fact that it has intervened more, that it's intruded more than it ought to, you and I would disagree on the dividing line, but we're not going to disagree on the basic point.
Well, they were being entirely too agreeable, it seems to me. You and I and these young people have agreed that the government has involved itself in many areas where perhaps it should not have involved itself in the beginning, or at the very least should no longer be involved. The question is, aren't many of the new regulations coming in under exactly the same auspices as those that of which you are now critical?
Well, we're talking about some unnecessary cost propping, price propping, competition stifling regulations, and we can identify, and we have identified a whole slew of them. That does not mean that the consumer doesn't need protection from false advertising or from adulteration of products or from drug abuses and so forth. I mean, drugs of the thalidomide kind, or even some of the antibiotics that are being misused. That's a very different kind of thing, Ben. That isn't a matter of the cost-price
how can you protect the consumer from every possible imperfection, say, in a drug product, without at the same time protecting him from those drugs that could save his life? I'm certain you're familiar with some of the recent studies that have been made that indicate, on balance, the Food and Drug Administration may have done more harm than good.
Well,
by holding off the market drugs that could have saved lives.
I don't read the conclusion that on balance they've done more harm than good.
What assurance can there be that when you bring in this imperfect agency of government, that you're not going to have brought in an apparent solution that's worse than the problem?
Wait a darn minute. Human beings are imperfect. What we have to do is look at those areas, and we are going to make mistakes in drawing the line sometimes. Look at those areas where the costs inflicted on the human being are greater than the benefits that might be taken away.
But who is to decide what those costs are, what those potential benefits are? Why not let the consumer, with the advisors that he seeks, make his own decision?
There simply isn't enough wisdom in the individual consumer. There are incredible limitations on information, and when you want to generalize, when you want to generate information that the individual is incapable of surrounding, you have to go collective to get that information.
Now, where do you find those wise people to man these agencies that you are going to create to do this?
Well, you recruit...
Because they, too, as you know, do not agree. One says cyclamates must be banned, and then they say later on, well, really, the evidence wasn't very good.
Look, you simply can't get around me by specific examples of mistakes. Mistakes are made. You've got to look at the batting average, and the batting average, I am satisfied, and you're not, has been one that to enable the American consumer to be far better off, far better protected, far better...
But unless we limit the government, who's to protect us from the government when the government, in fact, uses false advertising, when politicians use false advertising, promising things which they don't deliver, when the government, in fact, makes mistakes which hurt people directly in a very physical sense, who is to protect us from that unless we limit those areas in which the government may act?
You have to strike a balance. I mean, of course, governments make mistakes just like private citizens make mistakes. But you have to ask in the overall balance between the costs and the benefits, how do you come out?
When the government makes a mistake, it has the sheriff at its side to assist it, whereas when General Motors makes a mistake, no one is required to buy a General Motors car.
There have been some terrible abuses. On the other hand, we have the ballot box. And in the ballot box, we have a way to turn out the rascals. The mood of the country in 1976, I think, was translated into the ballot box in terms of people saying, well, there's too much government. There's both in terms of spending and regulation. And the government responded.
We're talking to Professor Friedman today at his lovely Vermont mountaintop home, where he and his economist wife, Rose, attempt for 6 months each year to get away from operations of this kind. Fortunately, he consented to let us come up here and talk with him because in the same manner that Walter Heller is recognized as one of the leading spokesmen for the modern liberal point of view, Milton Friedman is very clearly the leading spokesman of the strong free market, limited government position in the making of public policy. Milton, you've seen the film now, and in this cause in which you are involved, do you see this film as more a help or a handicap?
Oh, it's clearly a help. I think it's a splendid film. It portrays very dramatically and graphically many of the problems that arise when we turn over large parts of our lives to bureaucrats. But I thought the most effective parts were the scenes of the Amish farmer having his horses taken away from him because he was unwilling to pay Social Security taxes, and the two other similar real-life scenes of the drug bust and of the gentleman who was protecting his home from being converted into a parking lot under the rules of eminent domain.
Well, now let's take the farmer here for a moment. Haven't they taken care of that by exempting the Amish and the Mennonite from Social Security? Do you mean you would really just get rid of Social Security altogether?
They have, after enormous efforts and tremendous oppression of people, they exempted the Amish. But why shouldn't they exempt you and me too? Why should any of us be compelled to use part of our income in a particular way which the government specifies and for a program which the government runs? Personally, of course I would get rid of Social Security. I don't mean to say...
Now, what would you put in its place?
Well, go slowly before you do that, because I want to avoid misunderstanding. As of the moment, we, through our government, have entered into certain commitments to people under Social Security. I am not suggesting that we abrogate those commitments. Those ought to be completely met. However, I would be strongly in favor of terminating any such commitments now and saying from here on out, let everybody provide for himself the way he wants to, and let's have a strictly voluntary arrangement. If anybody wants to buy his retirement in the very ineffective form that the government provides it, let him do so. But the Social Security system as it is now is a farce. It's a fraud. It's presented as if it were an insurance scheme whereby individuals are spending their own money, are paying their own money to provide their own retirement. That's nonsense. What Social Security really is a combination of a very bad tax system with a very bad welfare program. I've always said it was one of the great miracles of Madison Avenue packaging. So of course I would get rid of it.
Well, let's take another one of the issues raised in the film, the issue of monopoly.
The major source of private monopoly has not been private collusion, it's been governmental activity. There is hardly a major monopoly in the United States that doesn't derive its powers from government grants. The law which would have the greatest value in curbing monopoly and promoting competition would be one which would abolish all tariffs and enact free trade. Because international competition would be the most effective way in which you could offset local monopolies and local power.
Well, let's explore for a moment to see in what areas you might take a different stand than Walter Heller. For example, he indicated very clearly that he believes the Food and Drug Administration should be continued and strengthened as a matter of fact. And of course, hopefully reducing its errors. Now, where do you stand on that?
I believe that the Food and Drug Administration has on the whole done a great deal more harm than it has good. I believe many more people have died as a result of the Food and Drug Administration's actions than have had their lives saved or improved. And the reason for that is very, very simple. No Food and Drug Administrator has ever been pilloried for not approving a drug which was potentially capable of saving many lives. Any Food and Drug Administrator is bound to be pilloried for making the other mistake. As a result, the food and drug people, naturally, in their own interest, not because they're mean or nasty or unfeeling or anything like that. They're perfectly humane, decent people. But they are, after all, concerned with their own interests, as we all are. And as a result, they have a bias in favor of holding up good drugs in order to avoid the possibility of a mistake of approving a bad one. The result is that there are many effective drugs which are available in Canada, in Britain, and elsewhere, which cannot be purchased by people in the United States, but which might very well save their lives. Obviously, the purpose of the Food and Drug Administration is a good one. The question in all of these cases is whether it achieves that purpose or has perverse effects, and I believe the Food and Drug Administration has bad effects.
Milton Walter Heller indicated that he would like to see some modifications in the minimum wage law, some exceptions made, lower rates for younger people and so on. What would you do about the minimum wage law if you could?
I would abolish it. There's no justification for the minimum wage law whatsoever. It's always been a mystery to me why a young black teenager is better off unemployed at $2.40 an hour than he would be being employed at $2 an hour. It doesn't do him any good to have a high wage rate if he doesn't have any work.
Milton, as you remember, I heard you present that series of lectures that eventuated in the publication Capitalism and Freedom. And one of the central themes in your lectures and in that publication is the close relationship between economic freedom and the other aspects of freedom. And of course, this is a point that is made throughout the film The Incredible Bread Machine. And I want to ask you, and in fact you who helped to script The Incredible Bread Machine, what are you frightened about? The process has been going on. We've had an ever-increasing role for government and economic life, yet our political freedoms still seem to be secure.
Are they really secure? Was the political freedom of that Amish farmer secure?
Well, eventually...
Eventually,
we provided a way to exempt him from that process. But again, you and I are still free to do our complaining.
Are we? Do you suppose that there is any professor of medicine at any major medical school in this country who would not think 3 times before getting up and making a speech against socialized medicine, given that his research is being financed by the National Institutes of Health? How many businessmen have you heard who have been willing to get up and talk publicly in opposition to governmental programs?
But Milton, I've also heard you say that one reason the businessman is not speaking against these programs is that he honestly has come to believe in them.
Some of them have. And of course, those who don't believe in them get eliminated by the force of competition. Because in order to survive as a major businessman today, an important characteristic has to be not your ability to produce, not your ability to sell, not your ability to meet public demand, but your ability to get your way in Washington. And the law of survival, just pure Darwinian survival, means that increasingly top businessmen are becoming people who are adept at politics, who know their way around Washington, and who, of course, as a result of familiarity with it, get to be in favor of it. But I go back to your question of whether economic controls has interfered with personal freedom. I think it's all the way up and down the line that you have enormous restrictions on political and economic freedom today. The only reason they're not more extreme is because of the one saving grace, and that is the inefficiency of government. Thank God that government wastes most of the money it spends, because if it were really spending it efficiently, we wouldn't have an iota of our freedom left.
Thank you.